"Ma'am, you need to leave before you embarrass yourself." That was the first thing she heard, loud enough for the nearby tables to pause their conversations. No welcome, no smile, just that cold sentence. "Before we go any further, I want to know where you are watching from right now. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that like button so you don't miss the rest of this story. Because what happened next will leave you speechless." Ava Morgan had walked into the newest branch of her own luxury restaurant chain. Morgan Lux Dining, wearing jeans, a plain white tee, and a soft gray baseball cap. She had booked a VIP table for herself that evening, something she had planned for weeks, hoping to sit quietly, taste the menu, and see the service exactly as a regular guest would. She wanted to spot the cracks, the missed smiles, the small details her managers might gloss over. But to the staff working the door that night, she didn't look like the kind of person they thought belonged in their VIP section. She was a black woman dressed simply, without a designer bag or diamond earrings, and instead of being asked for her reservation, she was met with suspicion. She gave her name to the hostess, a young trainee named Ella. But before Ella could pull up the booking, the branch manager, Clara Vaughn, stepped forward. Clara's tone was firm but dismissive as she said, "VIP is for members and special guests only. I'm afraid you'll have to take a regular table. If we have one available." Ava blinked. She knew Clara by reputation, not by personal interaction. Because this branch had only opened 3 weeks earlier, Clara had been hired for her resume, her experience managing upscale restaurants in Chicago and Miami, but Ava also knew something else. Clara had never once attended a diversity or cultural sensitivity workshop in her career, and had resisted it when corporate suggested it. Dominic Price, the shift supervisor, leaned against the podium beside her, arms folded, watching Ava with the kind of look people give when they've already decided you don't belong. Ava's instinct was to correct them immediately, to pull out her phone, show the reservation email, maybe even mention her title. But she stopped herself. This was exactly the kind of test she had wanted, only now. It wasn't a test she was conducting. It was one she was living. She smiled politely and repeated that she had a confirmed VIP booking for 8 o'clock under the name Ava Morgan. Clara glanced at the screen, then smirked and said, "That table is reserved for an Ava Morgan." "Yes, but clearly that's not you." The words were like a slap. A couple seated at the bar turned their heads. A man in a navy suit whispered something to the woman beside him. Ava kept her voice even. "And why is that? Ms. Vaughn?" Clara didn't answer right away. Instead, Dominic stepped in with a shrug. "Because we know our members, and you don't look like one. Maybe you should try somewhere that's more casual." That was the moment Ava realized she wasn't just being inconvenienced. She was being profiled, judged by her skin, her clothes, and their narrow definition of who deserved respect. Behind the podium, Ella's hands hesitated over the keyboard. She had seen the ID Ava presented, the same name on the booking, but Clara's sharp glance froze her in place. From the open kitchen, Victor Lane, the head chef, called out, asking what the holdup was. Clara raised her voice just enough for him to hear. "It's fine. Just sorting out a seating issue." Ava felt the room tighten around her. People were watching. The soft hum of conversation had turned into an uncomfortable silence. The live jazz band in the corner kept playing, but even their music seemed more tense. Ava considered her options. She could drop the act, reveal who she was, and demand immediate service. Or she could step outside, make some calls, and come back with a very different kind of energy. She chose the latter, with a calm that didn't match the fire building inside her. Ava said, "Thank you for your time," turned, and walked toward the door. Behind her, She could hear Dominic mutter something about wasting a VIP slot, followed by a few stifled laughs from the hostess stand. Outside, the warm Atlanta night air hit her face. She pulled out her phone, opened the messages from her PR manager, Naomi, and typed one line, "Call me now," within seconds. Naomi's voice came through, sharp and alert. Ava told her everything, word for word. Exactly as it had happened, Naomi's reaction was instant. "This is bigger than bad service. Ava, this is discrimination, and you caught them red-handed. Where are you now?" Ava said she was still outside the restaurant, leaning against her car. Liam, her driver and assistant, was in the front seat. Already sensing something was wrong, Naomi's next words were measured but urgent. "Don't go home. Sit tight. I'm getting Angela from the flagship location, and I'm calling Marcus. 10 minutes. We'll be there." Ava hung up, her jaw tight. She looked through the glass at the tables inside. Clara was back to smiling at guests. Dominic was carrying menus to a well-dressed couple. Victor was plating dishes under the warm lights of the kitchen pass. None of them knew that in less than half an hour. The power dynamic in that room would flip completely. Ava had spent years building Morgan Luxe Dining from nothing. Starting with a rented food truck and a single-family recipe, she had fought for every investor, every review, every lease, and now, at the peak of her career, she was standing outside her own restaurant, being told she didn't belong. She straightened her cap, took a slow breath, and decided the next time she walked through those doors, it would not be as an unrecognized customer, it would be as the owner. And when that moment came, she would not just correct the mistake, she would change the entire room. Ava stayed outside just long enough for her pulse to slow, but not long enough for the anger to fade. She watched through the glass as Dominic passed by the VIP section with 2 crystal decanters, pouring wine for a table of 4 in designer suits. Clara hovered close, bending low to check on them, her smile polished and warm. That same smile had been absent when she spoke to Ava. 10 minutes ago, Ava had been just another guest to them. No, not even that. She had been an intruder in their eyes. Liam stepped out of the car, his expression tight. "Naomi's on her way. She says Angela's with her, and Marcus is already pulling up the branch contracts." Ava nodded. This wasn't just about her feelings anymore. This was a breach of respect, of corporate policy, and of the very values she had built her company on, inside. The evening flowed on as if nothing had happened, but there was a subtle current, a tension that Ava knew she could use. She had built an empire on reading rooms, on feeling the unspoken energy between people. Right now, that energy told her that Clara thought she had won. Dominic thought he had put a pushy guest in her place, and Victor, though hidden in the kitchen, was probably still muttering about protecting the brand from customers who didn't fit a certain image. That image, let's be honest, was white, wealthy, and polished. Ava could still hear Dominic's words in her head. "Maybe you should try somewhere more casual." She had heard variations of that sentence her entire life, in school, in her first job interview, even when negotiating her first lease. People telling her where she didn't belong, as if they had the right to draw the map of her life. The difference now was that she owned the building they were standing in. A black SUV pulled up to the curb and Naomi stepped out, phone in hand, Angela right behind her, face set in a storm. Angela had managed the flagship location for 6 years. She knew every protocol, every employee code of conduct, every detail of Ava's standards for customer care. "They did what?" Angela said, her voice low but sharp. Ava told it again, this time with more detail, including Clara's smirk and Dominic's comment. Angela's eyes narrowed. "That's grounds for immediate termination." Marcus, the lawyer, arrived moments later, a leather folder tucked under his arm. "I've reviewed the contracts. he said without preamble. You have sole ownership, full operational authority, and no co-owner or investor with veto rights over personnel. That means you can make whatever staffing decisions you see fit, on the spot, as long as they're documented, and I suggest you document everything. Ava felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. This was no longer just an uncomfortable dinner gone wrong. This was a defining moment for her brand. If she let this slide, even quietly, it would send a message to her employees that bias could hide behind a polite smile and get away with it. But if she acted, and acted decisively, it would echo through every location of Morgan Luck's dining. Naomi checked her watch. We do this now. Tonight. The customers inside need to see it, the staff needs to see it, and the world will see it tomorrow. Ava glanced at the windows again. From her vantage point, she saw Ella, the trainee hostess, standing stiffly at the podium. She looked young, nervous. But Ava noticed something important. Ella wasn't joining the laughter that occasionally drifted from Clara and Dominic. She was keeping her head down, eyes darting to the reservation list, as if she wanted to speak, but didn't dare. Ava made a note in her mind. Ella might be the only one worth keeping. Angela leaned closer. When you walk back in, don't give them time to react. You control the room. You say what needs to be said, and when you're done, we escort them out. Ava nodded. She took a deep breath, adjusted the cap on her head, and smoothed the front of her tee. She wasn't dressing up for this. She wanted them to see the same woman they dismissed and realize who she was. No change of costume, no sudden flash of wealth, just the truth. Marcus opened his folder and pulled out a clean copy of the branch ownership papers. The Morgan Luck's dining corporate seal glinting under the streetlight. Ava took it. The embossed gold logo caught her eye for just a second. This was her name, her work, her life. No one had the right to make her feel like an outsider in her own creation. Naomi stepped to her side. Phone ready? I'll record the statement for internal use. But you know this is going to leak. Are you okay with that? Ava's eyes didn't leave the restaurant entrance. I'm counting on it. Inside. The band finished their song and the sound of applause rolled out into the street. The next song began, smooth and low, almost like the soundtrack to the moment Ava had been building toward. She pictured the looks on their faces. Clara's frozen smile, Dominic's surprise, Victor's defensiveness. She pictured Ella's relief. She pictured the quiet nods from guests who had witnessed the first part of this story without understanding the whole. Angela checked the door handle. Ready? Ava didn't answer with words. She stepped forward, pulling the door open. The warm light spilled over her face as she crossed the threshold. The room was about to learn who they had turned away, and more importantly, what that mistake would cost them. Ava walked back into the restaurant with the quiet force of someone who had already decided the ending of the story before the next chapter even began. The kind of confidence that didn't need to shout, but carried weight in every step, and the people in the room felt it before they understood it. She moved past the hostess stand without waiting for an invitation, the air shifting just enough to make Clara look up from her conversation with a couple at the bar. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly, the recognition not yet dawning, just a faint irritation that the woman she had dismissed earlier was back again. Dominic noticed too, straightening from where he leaned against the counter, his mouth curling into the ghost of a smirk, the same one that said he was already preparing another cutting remark. Ava didn't give him the chance. She walked toward the VIP section, each step slow and deliberate, her gaze sweeping the room, meeting eyes, letting the silence spread behind her like a long shadow. Naomi and Angela followed close, Angela's expression a perfect mirror of calm authority. Naomi with her phone raised in a subtle but deliberate signal that every word from here on out was going on record. Marcus brought up the rear, the folder of documents in his hand. the Morgan Lux dining seal clearly visible to anyone paying attention. Ella, the trainee hostess, froze at the stand, her eyes wide, flicking from Ava to Clara, sensing something was about to break open. Ava stopped just short of the table Clara was tending to, waited until the man in the tailored navy suit looked up, and in a voice that carried across the polished wood floors and over the low hum of the jazz band, she said, "I need every employee in this room to step forward." Now, the music didn't stop, but the energy in the room shifted instantly, guests exchanging glances. Forks paused halfway to mouths, a sense of something big about to happen. Clara straightened, forcing a smile. "I'm sorry, but this is a private dining area." Ava held up a single hand, palm out, cutting her off without raising her voice. "You've already spoken enough tonight. Get your team." The firmness in her tone had weight, the kind that bypassed debate. Dominic muttered something under his breath but obeyed, disappearing into the kitchen to fetch Victor, who emerged wiping his hands on a pristine white towel, his brow furrowed in annoyance. In less than a minute, the core staff was gathered: Clara, Dominic, Victor, and 2 servers standing off to the side, uncertain. Ella hovered near the podium, her fingers gripping the edge, her face pale but attentive. Ava waited until every eye was on her. Then she reached into Marcus's folder, pulled out the ownership papers, and laid them flat on the nearest empty table, the gold seal catching the warm light. She let the silence breathe for a beat before she spoke again. "For those of you who don't know me, and it's clear some of you don't, I am Ava Morgan. I built Morgan Lux Dining from the ground up. I signed the lease on this building. I approved the menu. I own this restaurant. Every brick, every glass, every fork you set on a table, and tonight. I walked in with a reservation for a VIP table that I confirmed myself, and I was told, to my face, that I did not belong here." The words hung heavy in the air, not rushed, each one landing with precision. A murmur moved through the guests, heads turning, eyes widening. Clara's smile faltered, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face before she caught herself. Dominic's smirk was gone, replaced by a tightening of his jaw. Victor shifted his weight, crossing his arms, but said nothing. Ava's eyes scanned each of them, pausing just long enough to make them uncomfortable. When I was stopped at the door, when I was told I wasn't welcome in my own restaurant, it wasn't because of a mix-up, it wasn't because of a booking error. It was because of an assumption about who belongs in this room and who doesn't. And that assumption has no place in my company. She didn't raise her voice, but there was a steel edge under every word, the kind that made people sit straighter without realizing they were doing it. Naomi moved slightly, catching Ella's eye, giving her a small nod, as if to reassure her that the truth was finally on the table. Ava took a step closer to Clara. The space between them charged. "You looked at me, you judged me, and you denied me service that I had already paid for. That is unacceptable. It is unprofessional. And it is done." Clara opened her mouth to speak, but Ava raised her hand again. "Not yet. You'll have your moment." She turned to Dominic. "You decided to add insult to injury, to tell me to try somewhere more casual. That statement, and the attitude behind it, is exactly why you will not be working here after tonight." Dominic shifted, his eyes darting to Victor as if for backup, but Victor just set his jaw tighter. Ava turned her gaze to him next. "And you're the head chef. You set the tone for the team. When you heard there was a guest issue at the front, you didn't come to check. You dismissed it. You enabled this behavior." Victor opened his mouth. "I have a kitchen to run. You have a business to respect." Ava interrupted, her tone cutting clean through his words. She let the silence sit again, her eyes sweeping the room, making sure not only the staff, but every guest understood what was happening. "I built Morgan Lux Dining to be a place where every guest feels valued, where excellence is not just in the food, but in the way people are treated from the moment they walk in. That standard was broken here tonight, and it will not happen again. She straightened, her decision already made, the shift in the room palpable, effective immediately. This restaurant will be under new management, and those responsible for tonight's conduct will be leaving now. The words landed like a gavel, and though the actual firings would come in the next moments, this was the pivot point. The second the staff realized the power had shifted entirely. The second the guests knew they were watching a story that would be told far beyond these walls. Ava had come back not as a customer seeking a table, but as the owner reclaiming her house, and this was only the beginning. Ava didn't wait for the shock to settle before she moved to the final reveal. Her presence in the center of the room now commanding every set of eyes, every quiet breath, the soft clink of a glass being set down somewhere in the back. The jazz band played on for another few notes before the singer, sensing the shift in the air, let the song trail off into silence. "Clara Vaughn," Ava said, her tone even but with an edge that could cut glass. "You are relieved of your position as manager of this branch, effective immediately." The words weren't shouted, but they landed with the finality of a slammed door. Clara's lips parted in disbelief, her voice trembling just slightly as she tried to gather herself. "This isn't how you run a business, Ava. It's how I run mine." Ava cut in, holding her gaze. "And you've made it clear tonight that you don't understand the values of this company or the meaning of hospitality." Clara straightened her shoulders, attempting to salvage her dignity in front of the crowd. "I have built my career on luxury service. I have worked in the finest establishments in the country. I have." Ava raised a hand, not aggressively, but in a quiet gesture of finality. "And yet you couldn't extend basic courtesy to the owner of the building you stand in? That tells me all I need to know." She turned to Dominic next, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "Dominic Price, your employment here is also terminated, effective immediately." Dominic gave a sharp, humorless laugh, looking around at the guests as if trying to rally them to his side. "So this is about hurt feelings? About a little misunderstanding? Lady, customers come here for an experience, and we protect that. You didn't fit the image. We didn't think you belonged in VIP." His voice was defiant, but there was an undercurrent of desperation in it, like a man who realized the ground under him was starting to crack. Ava stepped closer, her voice low but perfectly audible. "The only image that matters here is the one that says every guest is respected. No exceptions. And if you can't see that, then you never belonged here at all." Dominic's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more, his smirk gone. Then came Victor. Ava didn't hesitate. "Victor Lane, as head chef, you were responsible for the tone of this team. You failed to lead, you failed to intervene, and you failed to uphold the standard I built this brand on. You're done here." Victor threw the towel he'd been holding onto a nearby table, his face flushing red. "I've worked in Michelin-starred kitchens. I've fed senators and movie stars, and you think you can walk in here and—" Ava didn't flinch. "I don't think— I know. I own this place, and I expect the people who work here to reflect that with pride and professionalism. Tonight, you showed neither." The crowd, mostly silent until now, shifted uncomfortably. A few murmurs rippled through the room, and one man near the bar gave a quiet nod, as if approving the way she held her ground. Angela stepped forward, placing herself just behind Ava's shoulder, her posture solid and unshakable. "I'll take over operations for tonight," she said calmly, her voice carrying. Naomi, still recording, moved subtly to get a better angle, capturing the reactions, the flicker of anger in Clara's eyes, the stunned rigidity of Dominic's posture, the way Victor's jaw worked like he was grinding down the last of his defiance. Ava addressed the entire staff now, her tone not just for those being dismissed, but for those who would remain. This is not about ego. This is not about one night. This is about the foundation of what I built. Morgan Lux. Dining was created to be a place where excellence in service is matched only by respect for every person who walks through those doors. The food is world class, the setting is world class, and the people will be world class, or they will not be here at all. Clara took a step forward, her voice rising, a flash of desperation cutting through her practiced poise. You're making a mistake. Ava, this branch will crumble without us. You think you can just fire your top people in the middle of service and walk away? Ava didn't move, didn't blink. Watch me. She gave a slight nod to the security guard posted near the entrance, a tall man in a crisp suit who had watched the entire scene unfold. Without a word, he stepped forward. Clara's face drained of color as he positioned himself beside her. Dominic swore under his breath, grabbing his jacket from the back of a chair. Victor muttered something too low to catch, but his glare spoke volumes as they were escorted toward the door. Ava didn't follow them with her eyes. She turned instead to Ella, who stood frozen at the podium, looking both terrified and relieved. Ella, I saw you. I saw that you recognized my name earlier. I saw that you wanted to speak up. That matters. You'll stay, and you'll be trained properly. Ella's breath caught, and she nodded quickly, her eyes glassy. Ava faced the room once more. For tonight, your experience will continue uninterrupted. Angela will oversee service. Tomorrow, this branch begins a new chapter. The guests began to stir again, conversations bubbling back to life, but with a different tone now, less gossip, more respect. A few even raised their glasses subtly in her direction. Ava walked to the ownership papers still laid out on the table, folded them neatly, and handed them back to Marcus. The band quietly began to play again, but now the music felt like an exhale, a release of the tension that had held the room. Ava had come in as an unrecognized guest and been pushed out. She had returned as the owner, revealed her identity, and in the same breath, removed the rot from her own house. And though she knew the storm outside, social media, press, public reaction, was only just beginning, she also knew one thing for certain: inside these walls, tonight, respect had been restored. The door hadn't even closed behind the departing security guard before Clara spun back toward Ava, her heels striking the marble floor with sharp, angry clicks. You can't just humiliate me in front of an entire dining room and think that's the end of it, she said, her voice rising above the low hum of returning conversations. Guests began glancing back again, sensing that the scene wasn't over. Ava didn't flinch. She stayed at the center of the room, posture calm, hands folded loosely in front of her. Clara, you had your chance to run this branch with dignity. You made your choice tonight. This is the result. Clara laughed once, a brittle sound. You think this is about one night? I have contacts in this city. Ava, people who won't take kindly to you tossing me out like a criminal. I can ruin this place with a single phone call. Ava's gaze didn't waver. If you could ruin it, you would have built it yourself. But you didn't. I did. And what I built is stronger than your gossip. Clara's jaw tightened. But before she could fire back, Dominic stepped forward, still in his server's vest, his hands clenched. You want to talk about values? Let's talk about the way you waltz in here after months of not even setting foot in this location, expecting everyone to bow down because your name's on a piece of paper. We've been the ones keeping this place running, not you. Ava's voice remained even, though the steel beneath it was unmistakable. Dominic, what keeps this place running is the vision, the standard, and the culture I built. Without that, you're just serving expensive food on nice plates. And you proved tonight you don't care about the culture at all. He scoffed, shaking his head. Culture doesn't pay the bills. Ava didn't miss a beat, but without it, there's no one left to send the bill to. His glare hardened, but she moved on, not giving him the last word. Victor, who had been silent up to now, finally spoke, his voice deep and loaded with disdain. I've worked for owners like you before, the kind who think a business is just a stage for their ego. You have no idea what it takes to keep a kitchen like this moving. You think respect is given just because you sign checks. Respect is earned in the heat, in the pressure, in the skill, and you've been too far removed to have any of that. Ava took a step toward him, close enough that only a few inches of air separated them. Respect is also earned in the way you treat people, the way you lead when no one is watching. And tonight, when someone needed leadership, you stayed in the kitchen and let arrogance do your talking. That is why you're leaving. Victor's eyes burned, and for a moment, it seemed like he might say something worse, something that would turn ugly. But instead, he shook his head, muttered a curse, and grabbed his knife roll from a shelf near the kitchen door. The room's attention stayed fixed on them as security returned. This time, with 2 more guards in tow, Ava gave them a slight nod, and they positioned themselves around Clara, Dominic, and Victor. Clara made one last attempt, pointing at Ella. You think this one's going to save you? She'll quit in a week. Nobody good is going to work for you after this circus. Ella flinched at being singled out, but Ava turned to her and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. Ella will be fine. She'll get the training she deserves, the support she deserves, and she will work in a place where respect isn't optional. That's more than you ever gave her. Clara opened her mouth again, but Ava raised her hand, and the guards began to guide them toward the door. Dominic's voice carried as they moved. You're going to regret this. You think the press will be on your side, but wait until they hear our side. Ava answered without turning her head. They will, and when they compare our stories, they'll see the truth. The 3 were led out, the heavy glass doors closing behind them with a muted thud that seemed to echo in the quiet that followed. Ava let the silence settle for a few long seconds, her eyes moving over the guests who were still watching, over the staff who remained at their stations, unsure whether to keep working or wait for instructions. Angela stepped forward, her voice steady. We will finish service tonight. For those staying, follow my lead. We will show these guests what Morgan Lux Dining stands for. A few quiet nods came from the servers, and slowly, the energy in the room began to shift again. Naomi lowered her phone, the recording still running, and gave Ava a look that was part approval, part readiness for the next stage of the battle. This is going to blow up, she said softly, almost to herself. Ava didn't look away from the dining room. Good. Let it. She knew the fight wasn't over. Outside these walls, the 3 she'd just dismissed would be making calls, spinning stories, trying to turn this night into a weapon against her. But inside, in this moment, the air felt lighter. The rot had been cut out, the cancer removed, and though the wound was fresh, she could already feel the healing beginning. Guests began to resume their meals, some casting subtle nods of respect her way, others whispering with the animated tone of people who knew they had just witnessed something they would be telling friends about for years. Ava stood in the center of it all, not smiling, not celebrating, just breathing, her resolve steady. The war might just be starting, but tonight's battle was won. By the next morning, the story had already taken on a life of its own. The first video went up on TikTok before Ava had even left the restaurant the night before. A shaky clip taken from the bar showing her standing in the center of the VIP section, papers in hand, calmly announcing the firings. By sunrise, it had been reposted hundreds of times, stitched with commentary, slowed down for emphasis on her most cutting lines. On Twitter, The hashtag #SheOwnsThePlace began trending. Alongside Morgan Lux and Respect at the Table, some praised her for defending her values, for standing up against discrimination in real time, for doing it without shouting or theatrics, just clear, decisive authority. Others accused her of overreacting, of using her position to humiliate employees in public. Cable news picked it up before noon, the morning anchors showing the footage while talking about racial profiling, leadership in crisis, and the risks of public firings in the age of social media. Naomi had anticipated this storm and was already working her angles. She lined up a segment with a sympathetic local news station, framing the incident not as a petty power move, but as a stand against behavior that had no place in hospitality. Marcus drafted a formal statement for release. Morgan Lux Dining remains committed to excellence in service and respect for all guests. Recent events at our Atlanta branch revealed conduct inconsistent with our values. Immediate action was taken to preserve the integrity of the brand. Ava signed it without edits. Meanwhile, Clara, Dominic, and Victor were busy with their own campaign. They gave quotes to a blog notorious for stirring controversy, painting Ava as an absentee owner who blew in for attention and destroyed careers over a misunderstanding. They claimed the seating issue was about maintaining standards and accused her of turning it into a racial incident for publicity. Ava didn't respond directly. Naomi had drilled into her the power of letting your opponents show their own flaws in the light. Instead, she focused on her team. At noon, she held a closed-door meeting at the flagship location with all managers from every branch. She told the story exactly as it happened, then laid out the new, non-negotiable training protocols, quarterly diversity and inclusion workshops, mandatory for all employees, and a refreshed service charter that left zero room for assumptions based on appearance. "We are in the business of making people feel welcome," she said, her voice carrying in the quiet room. "And if you can't do that without checking someone's bank account or their wardrobe first, you can't work here." The room was silent for a beat before Angela spoke up. "It's the right move. Ava, this will protect the brand, and it will protect our people." Meanwhile, Ella became an unexpected figure in the online conversation. Someone had identified her in the original video, standing at the podium, clearly uncomfortable, and she was suddenly getting messages of support from strangers who saw her as a symbol of integrity under pressure. Ava called her personally, thanked her for holding the line that night, and offered her a position at the flagship for additional training. Ella's voice cracked with gratitude. "I just didn't want to lose my job. I didn't think anyone noticed." "I noticed," Ava said. That same afternoon, the investor who had quietly supported Clara reached out. His tone was polite, but his words were pointed. He was concerned about the optics and suggested Ava smooth things over with the dismissed staff to avoid further media scrutiny. Ava's reply was as crisp as it was final. "I don't smooth over disrespect. I remove it." That evening, the second wave of public reaction hit. A well-known civil rights activist shared the video with a caption praising Ava for addressing bias head-on. That post went viral, pulling the conversation out of the hospitality bubble and into broader debates about race, professionalism, and leadership. Ava's inbox flooded with speaking invitations from business groups and universities. She accepted none, at least, not yet. The work wasn't finished. At the Atlanta branch, Angela oversaw a reshuffle of the remaining staff. Morale was mixed. Some employees were relieved to see the toxic dynamic removed, others nervous about the scrutiny. Service, however, ran smoothly under Angela's watch, and guest satisfaction scores from that weekend came in higher than the branch's opening week. Marcus quietly began preparing legal countermeasures in case the dismissed staff made good on their threats of wrongful termination suits. Naomi kept monitoring the online conversation, ready to intervene if the narrative shifted too far toward the former employee's version. Ava, for her part, spent the evening at home, not scrolling through the coverage, not watching the clips. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, thinking about the years it had taken to build her company, the sacrifices, the endless hours, the belief that she could create something better in an industry that too often catered only to a narrow vision of who mattered. She thought about her parents, who had never set foot in a fine dining restaurant when she was a child, who had taught her that real class had nothing to do with money or clothes, and everything to do with how you treat people. The fallout was far from over. She knew there would be more headlines, more debates, maybe even more personal attacks. But she also knew that her message had been heard, inside her company and far beyond it. And that, she decided, was worth every ounce of the storm she had stepped into. A week later, the noise had begun to settle, but the ripples of that night were still moving outward, touching places Ava hadn't even imagined. She had turned down every TV panel, every primetime interview, every attempt to pull her into a shouting match on live news. Instead, she chose her own stage. The first was a small community center in the west side of Atlanta, the neighborhood where she'd grown up. The room was packed, old neighbors, young entrepreneurs, students, even a few reporters who had come without cameras just to listen. Ava stood at the front, no microphone, no podium, just her voice carrying through the quiet space. She told them exactly what happened at the restaurant. She didn't embellish it, didn't dramatize the insults, just laid them out plainly. They looked at me, she said, and decided I didn't belong. That was the only mistake they needed to make for me to know everything else about them. She let that hang for a moment before adding, "And here's the truth. You're going to walk into rooms where people think they already know you, where they've decided your place before you've said a word. You can walk out, or you can claim the space you've earned." That night, I claimed mine. The applause was soft at first, then grew. Not the kind of applause that ends quickly, but the steady rhythm of people who've heard something that strikes deeper than admiration. Over the following days, Ava began accepting a handful of invitations to speak at business schools, women's leadership conferences, and gatherings for young Black entrepreneurs. Each time, she carried the same message: know your worth, defend your standard, and never let anyone's small vision define your place. Back at Morgan Lux Dining, the Atlanta branch transformed. Angela took the permanent role of general manager, and Ella moved into a guest relations position, where her natural warmth could shine. The new staff came from a wide range of backgrounds: chefs, servers, and hosts who understood that excellence was not the privilege of a few, but the responsibility of all. Customer feedback soared, and the branch became not just a dining destination, but a talking point in the city for the right reasons. One evening, Julian Moore, the food critic who had been there that night, returned anonymously. He sampled the menu, observed the service, and later published a review that began with, "I've seen many restaurants chase luxury. I've seen fewer achieve it, but it's rare to see one define it in real time. Right before your eyes." Ava clipped that line and pinned it to the board in her office, in private moments. She reflected on what had been lost and gained. She had lost 3 employees. Yes, but she had gained something harder to measure: clarity. The brand was stronger because it had been tested. Her leadership was sharper because it had been challenged, and her resolve to protect what she had built was deeper than ever. She thought often of her parents, imagining the pride in their faces if they could see not just the success, but the stand she had taken to keep it rooted in the values they had taught her. She thought about the young women who now sent her messages daily, some in business, some still in school, telling her that seeing her stand up in that room made them believe they could. 2. Ava began mentoring a small group of them, meeting once a month over coffee, sharing what she had learned about contracts, investors, branding, and, most of all, self-respect. The headlines eventually faded, as they always do, replaced by the next scandal, the next viral clip. But the story didn't fade for those who had seen it firsthand, or for the staff who now carried themselves with the confidence of people working for a company that lived its values. And for Ava, it never faded at all. It was a reminder, every time she walked into a room, any room, that her place in it wasn't up for debate. Months later, standing on a balcony in New York City, overlooking the site of her next branch, she thought back to that night in Atlanta, the sting of the words, "You need to leave before you embarrass yourself," had dulled, but the lesson they carried stayed sharp. She smiled to herself, imagining the first night this new branch would open, the mix of guests, the hum of conversation, the staff greeting every single person with the same warmth, whether they came in wearing a $1,000 suit or a $20 jacket. She pictured the table she would sit at, not hidden, not testing anyone, but visible, present, enjoying the space she had created. "They thought I didn't belong at my own table," she murmured, not to anyone else but the night air. "I built the table, and I'll keep making room for everyone who deserves a seat." That was the legacy she wanted. Not the viral moment, not the headlines, but the chain of quiet. Steady changes that ripple out when one person refuses to accept the smallest form of disrespect. And somewhere deep down, she knew that no matter how many branches Morgan Lux Dining opened, no matter how many new menus or accolades came, that night in Atlanta would remain the moment she proved, beyond all doubt, that the values she built on were not negotiable. It wasn't just a victory. It was a line drawn in the marble of her own floor, a promise that anyone who stepped into her house would feel the weight of respect from the moment they arrived. That was her table, and she would never let anyone push her away from it again. Thank you for listening. If this story spoke to you, please subscribe, like, and share. See you in the next story.